Thank you. And it's good to be back in Buenos Aires. So it's nice to see kind of the conference growing. Thank you, Maria, for inviting me. So how many of you are pro-freedom? I'm looking for who's now raising their hand. All right. So everybody, basically, everybody here is pro-freedom. But note that it's interesting. If we had a group here of communists, I mean, imagine a hall full of communists. I think you can do that in Argentina. And I asked them if they were pro-freedom. What would they say? Yes, they'd all say yes. Absolutely. I mean, indeed, if you take any group, anywhere, any ideology, and you ask them, are they pro-freedom? They will say, yes, of course, freedom, that's great. We all love freedom. It's really important that we define what we mean. It's really important that we know what we're talking about. And freedom is one of those concepts where it's particularly important because it often seems like we're all talking about the same thing, and maybe we're not. Because we have different definitions of the term itself. So I want to tell you about how Objetivism views freedom and what Objetivism's definition, or Ayn Rand's definition, Ayn Rand's philosophy's definition of what freedom means. And then maybe we can contrast it a little bit with some other views of what freedom is. For Rand, freedom is not the end. Freedom is a means. The focus of Ayn Rand's philosophy, the focus of Objetivism, is not politics. It's not a political outcome. The focus of Rand's philosophy is your life. It's each one of our lives. And how we make the most of that life. Where Rand is most revolutionary is that she says that the purpose of your life is you. Your success as a human being. Your flourishing as a human being. And ultimately, your happiness. She is a moral egoist, advocating for rational self-interest. A philosophy of individual human flourishing. That is revolutionary. Most of us have grown up in a very different philosophical framework, a very different moral perspective on how one should live our lives. If I say to you, in the culture out there, you're selfish, you're self-interested, is that a compliment? No. We grow up in a world in which we're expected to sacrifice. We're expected to live for others. We're expected to be selfless. Think of yourself last, my mother told me, and I'm sure your mother's told you. Think of others first. They're what's important. And think about, what this means if your whole conception of morality, i.e., that which should guide your life, the principles by which you should live your life, is oriented towards other people, towards self-denial, towards self-sacrifice, which is the common philosophical view out there. And since we're talking about libertarians and conservatives and objectivists, principle is a political principle, not a moral principle. To each his own. Yeah, if you want to sacrifice, sacrifice. If you don't want to sacrifice, don't sacrifice. But there is no moral philosophy in libertarianism. Libertarianism is a political philosophy. It's about politics. It starts with the concept of non-initiation of force. In other words, it starts with freedom. It doesn't start with morality. Objectivism, Ayn Rand, starts with morality because the only purpose for freedom, the only purpose to be free is to have the freedom to do what? To have a good life. To live a good life. We'll return to that. So for objectivism, morality, in a sense, is where the action is. Morality is what's important. Morality is what's interesting. And politics is a derivative of a particular, specific moral code. And in objectivism, we have a particular view of what is required in order to live a good life. In order to live a good life, one must do something in particular. We are a particular type of biological entity. We have a particular nature. There is something that is common to all of us. Everybody in the room, as different as all of you are, as different as human beings are, there's something common to all of us in terms of what is necessary for us to live a good life. I mean, look around. If you look around this room, and there are quite a few of you here, but one thing is common among all of you. You know, as an animal, you guys are pretty pathetic. Just looking at this group, you're weak, you're slow, you have no claws, no fangs. You try going out there and running down an animal and trying to eat it. You're not going to be doing very well. You and a saber-toothed tiger, I'm betting on the saber-toothed tiger, if all you are is muscle and material. Why is the saber-toothed tiger in the museum and we're all sitting here comfortably, wealthy? Maria just gave us a whole story on how wonderful life is. How did we get there? How was that created? What is it that makes it possible for you to stand in front of a saber-toothed tiger and win and survive and thrive, and for him to be dead? Your mind, our ability to think, our ability to reason, our ability to be rational. We are the rational animal. We are a species that survives by its mind, survives by reason, thrives by reason. Everything we have here, every value that we have, every value that is important to us is a product of human reason. It's a product of human thinking. It's how human beings survive. And reason is something very specific. It's the means by which we integrate the evidence of our senses into more and more abstract ideas. And this reasoning capability is what makes us human and what makes it possible for us to be successful. But that again, all of that chain of reasoning is a philosophical statement about the nature of man. Note that, for example, for a conservative, man is not primarily a rational animal. Rationality has its place, reason has its place, but so does faith, emotion. Man is, originally sinful, and he really gains success through his connection with another being or through learning from some kind of tradition. But conservatism fundamentally rejects reason as man's basic means of survival, which is a key principle in objectivism and a key principle in our morality and our epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge. Libertarianism's position on reason. I love the silence because that's exactly the appropriate response. Because there is no position. Again, libertarianism is not a philosophy. It doesn't have ideas at the foundation. It starts with non-initiation of force. It starts with politics. And I think that's the challenge. Because what's really interesting, what's really important, is how to live as individuals. Life is pretty good, as Maria told us. But how do we make the most of it? How do we live the best life we can live? We have one shot at this, one life. How do we make the most of this one life? That's what's important. So why freedom? Or what are some of the different, why freedom for an objectivist? There's no clock here, right? Okay. Yeah, so all the schedule's off. Why freedom? If my mind is what I need in order to understand the world, if the mind is what I need in order to pursue values, in order to identify the appropriate values I should pursue. You know, we have a lot of choices in this wonderful world that we have. How do I make that choice? How do I decide? I have to think it through. I have to decide what is best for my long-term well-being. What is most consistent with my rational nature? So if I have a mind, I want to be able to use that mind to pursue my values. I want to be able to use my mind in order to pursue my life, in order to achieve as much happiness, as much flourishing as I can for me. I wonder what political system would allow me to do that. Political system where people told me what to do? No, I want to use my judgment, not other people's judgment. A political system that constrained and limited me, that regulated me, that supervised everything that I do? No, I want to live by my terms, right? Only I can choose my values. Nobody can choose values for me. Nobody can get inside of my head. Fundamental reason that central planning doesn't work is not because they're not smart enough. It's not because of any economic reason. The fundamental reason central planning doesn't work is because only I can choose my values. And therefore, only I can act in an economy and decide what I want and what I don't want, how I want to live it. It's not a failure reason that central planning doesn't succeed. It's because of reason central planning doesn't succeed. Because each one of us as individual has reason. This is my critique of Hayek, just in case you were missing it, right? Each one of us has reason as an individual. And you can't aggregate those reasons. You can't superimpose something on top of our individual reason. Only you can make choices for your own life. You might make mistakes. You might make errors, but they're your mistakes. And if you're smart, if you're rational, you will learn from it and do better next time. So reason is an attribute of individuals, not of groups. So freedom is a value to me. We'll talk about what freedom is in a minute, because it allows me, in my definition of freedom, to use my mind in pursuit of my values, free of what? What is the enemy of the mind? Force is the enemy of the mind. The reason you have a non-aggression principle is not because it sounds good. The reason the non-aggression principle is good, right, and we're against aggression, is because force is what cripples the mind. Force is what subjugates my mind to an authority and doesn't allow me then to make my choices based on my values. If I stick a gun to your head, reason is irrelevant. You do what I tell you. If a regulator tells you, I don't know, life extension research, we're never going to approve it. Nobody's going to do life extension research. Thinking is not going to go into that area. Force cripples the mind. Force destroys reason. Force destroys rationality. It makes rationality irrelevant and impossible. But we're a rational animal. We survive by reason. We survive by rationality. Oh, so force is against my very nature as a human being. It's against my very view of ethics, my very view of epistemology, my very view of philosophy. Force is antagonistic to my life. Yes, I'm against it because I value my life. I'm not against it because I don't like force. It seems bad. Generally, yeah, it's ugly. No, I get why force is bad. Fundamentally, it restricts my ability to use my mind in pursuit of my values. So what is freedom for an objectivist? It's the ability to use your mind in pursuit of your values, free of coercion, force, free of an authority that imposes its will on you. It's the ability to pursue happiness. It's the ability to live life to the fullest. And fullest means no force, because force is restricting, limiting. It's a power that destroys choice and happiness and values. But not everybody has that conception of freedom. Everybody see the movie Braveheart? Remember Braveheart? Mel Gibson. Is it Mel Gibson? Yeah, Mel Gibson. Movie Braveheart. Yeah. What's it? Corazón valiente. Did I get that okay? All right. So you remember there's a scene, I assume most of you have seen Braveheart, but there's a scene in Braveheart where the two armies are arrayed and they're about to fight this big battle. And the Scots, the movie is about Scotland, and the Scots all yell, freedom, and they're really motivated, right? Freedom, we're going to fight for freedom. What do they mean by freedom? They mean I want to be able to live my life based on my mind in pursuit of my values, free of coercion or force? Is that what they mean by freedom? Yeah. What they really mean by freedom is we want to be ruled by a Scottish king, not an English king. We want force to be imposed on us, but we want to make sure it's one of our own imposing force on us. We want to make sure that he has the same bloodline as we have. They're not about freedom in a sense that I just described. This is what collectivist so-called freedom is. I want somebody from my tribe to decide my decisions for me, not from that other tribe that I don't like, the English. That's not freedom. That's subjugation. They're not yelling freedom. They're yelling my tribe over your tribe. Which is so often the case in the world in which we live today. People say they're fighting for freedom, but they're not fighting for freedom. They're fighting for their tribe. Freedom fundamentally is individualistic. It is not about the tribe. It is not about which king rules. It's about getting rid of kings. It's about getting rid of rulers. So, again, in our culture today, this idea of freedom as a collectivistic attitude is very prevalent. Instead of the individualistic idea of freedom is fundamentally about me, about you, about every one of you being able to use your minds in pursuit of your values free of coercion. Now, in order to do that, in order to have freedom, one must recognize in a social context that every single one of us has the right to that freedom. That it's not, is that how much time's left? Okay. It's not a group thing. Again, it's an individual thing. How much each one of us, how can we guarantee that each one of us has that freedom to use their mind, pursuit of values, free of coercion? How do we guarantee that? Well, we've come up with an idea, a concept, that captures this notion of individualistic freedom. And that idea is individual rights. Individual rights means that you have the freedom to act in pursuit of your values. Again, freedom means no coercion, no force. That's what the concept of individual rights means. It's being perverted, it's being distorted by others and by other philosophies, but fundamentally, it means the freedom to act, free of coercion. Act for what? by using your mind in pursuit of your values, by being rational. Now, objectivism holds, therefore, that you need some way to guarantee these rights. These rights are not arbitrary. These rights are not subjective. These rights are not dependent on how you feel. They're objective in reality. The freedoms, their lack of coercion is objective in reality. And we need an institution in order to protect those rights. And that institution is government. So if objectivism counter to libertarianism, objectivism holds that government is a necessary good. Libertarianism holds that it's a necessary evil sometimes, or that it's not necessary. Now, we're going to do a debate tomorrow about whether it's necessary or not. But objectivism holds it's a necessary good because it's the only way to guarantee an objective defense of individual rights. The right to life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. That is the freedoms to act, again, free of coercion, free of force, as individuals in the world out there. Conservatism has a more, again, collectivistic view of these issues, and therefore rights fluctuate. You don't have an absolute right to your own liberty, to your own freedom. It depends on the social good. It depends on whether it's good for society or bad for society. Who decides that? What's good for society and bad for society? Who decides that? I don't know, maybe a majority or maybe a leader, but somebody else, not you. And the rights are not absolute. So the only system that guarantees freedom, is a system in which you have a government that protects an objective definition, an objective view of what rights are, and acts to protect those rights, acts to defend those rights. That is the only way you get freedom. Freedom is not achieved in the wilderness, without government. Freedom is not guaranteed in any kind of social context without a government that's only responsibility, only duty, only thing it does is protect individual rights. And that is Ayn Rand's view on basically the nature of government. So I want to leave some time for Q&A. So, if we're going to advocate for freedom, the right kind of freedom, the first thing is to really understand why you want to be free. I know why I want to be free. I want to be free because I want to be able to maximize my potential as a human being. I want to live the best darn life I can live. I want to achieve the maximum happiness and success and prosperity and flourishing that I can achieve. That's why I want to be free. And, and the people I like, not everybody, but the people I like, I want them to be able to maximize their ability as human beings. And even the people I don't know, I want them to maximize. Why do I want them to maximize their ability as human beings? Because I'll end up trading with them. And if they maximize, if they produce, if they create, then I get to benefit from all of their creation and all of their production. Human beings are wonderful. I want them all to be successful. I want them all to be happy if they can. I'm the beneficiary of that. So I want to be free. I fight for freedom because I'm an egoist. I fight for freedom because I'm self-interested, because I care about my life. I hope you join me in that fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaron. Excellent talk. Les recordamos a todos que después de cada charla se van a habilitar 2 micrófonos, uno aquí y otro en el otro pasillo para que hagan preguntas. Vamos a hacer 2 o 3 ahora si nos ajustamos un poco con la agenda y después vamos a tener un break que también lo vamos a cortar un poquito, pero les doy el poder de acercarse y hacerle alguna pregunta a Yaron que quieran. Pueden hacerla en español si alguno le da un poco de nervios el inglés.
Maria, get me my translating thing. Just tell me in advance if you're asking the question in Spanish or English.
Tratemos, sí, por favor, de hacer preguntas concisas sobre la charla, por lo menos así no nos desviamos tanto.
Pregunta en español. Hizo usted una exposición sobre la libertad muy clara y muy bien expresada. Ahora, ¿cómo toma usted que el liberalismo, el empirismo, el racionalismo y el nominalismo, esas corrientes filosóficas, nos llevaron al socialismo y al comunismo?
It's how did we get to socialism and communism given the philosophical, the secular philosophies that have existed over the last 200 years? I think the fundamental cause, I mean, the two basically fundamental causes that go to the heart of my presentation. The first is none of those philosophies rejected the age-old and ultimately Christian philosophy, morality of altruism. Altruism is the morality of self-sacrifice. Altruism is the morality that others are what are important. And no philosopher, really, until Ayn Rand, no philosopher, including the nominalists, including all the philosophers, have rejected the morality that is altruism. Now, if the purpose of my life is to sacrifice to you, if the purpose of my life is not my happiness, but your happiness, and of course you can't accept that happiness, you have to sacrifice the next person and pass it on, then what system is better than socialism? Socialism is all about sacrifice. It's all about giving up. It's all about not living for yourself, but living for others. So socialism is a direct political manifestation of altruism. It takes this idea that an individual doesn't count. What matters is the group. You, as an individual, must sacrifice to the group. And it implements it. And it always fails because that morality is anti-life. It doesn't fail for political reasons. It fails for ethical reasons. It's anti-life to sacrifice for others, to live for others. Why should I live for other people? That's the question you should all ask. Why? There is no answer, other than a power above us dictated it, or some philosopher said it. But it's all authority-based. It's not logically based. The second thing that every single one of those philosophies do is, even though they claim to be somehow, some way advocates of reason, they ultimately reject reason as practical, reason as the thing that allows human beings to survive. They reject reason. They even reject science as teaching us about certainty and about what's really going on in the world. If you reject reason, if you reject the mind, then it means that as individuals, we can't really survive. You know, there are basically two views on how individuals can survive. Either you can survive by using your own mind in pursuing your own values, or you have to do what somebody else who maybe has a contact with the world of forms in Plato's words, or God or something else, and then he tells you what to do. And by undermining reason, by disconnecting reason from our life, disconnecting reason from reality, the German romantics, Kant, and everybody else basically say reason is kind of a mind game. It's up here, but it's not relevant to actually success and living in life. And that leaves it open for somebody to come and say, yeah, you guys are miserable. You don't know how to live. Your reason is incapable of connecting to the real world. I can connect to the real world. I have special powers. Just do what I tell you, and everything will be okay. And every single socialist, every single fascist says exactly the same thing. You proletarian, why do we need a dictator for the proletarian? Why do the communists need a dictator? Because somebody has to decide what's good for the proletarian. Proletarian can't decide. So why do we need a dictator for the Aryan race if we're Nazis? Because who decides what the Aryan race needs? What's good for them? Well, we need a dictator to commune with the spirit of the Aryan race. It's only individualists who believe you have the capability to think for yourself and pursue your own life and values. Only we can really advocate for freedom, because only we understand that individuals do well when they're left alone, because their reason is capable of knowing reality. So the philosophers stuck with the old ethics of altruism, and they reject reason as man's means of survival, reason as competent, as connecting us with reality as it is.
Vamos ahí con una pregunta. Sí.
I'll try to pose my question in English.
Wonderful.
So bear with me.
Okay.
Throughout your presentation, you sort of establish how sort of like reason is not like an end, but rather a mean to it. So if you lack that mean, you wouldn't eventually have the ability to eventually reach your goals. Therefore, my question for you is, from an objectivist standpoint of view, why should we sort of care and allow to exist someone else's freedom and life if they lack reason for, I don't know, any unforeseen medical reasons or any sort of medical conditions that would impair the reason, like dementia, Alzheimer's, any sort of those things? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, when somebody is lost this capacity to think for themselves, then what is left is the memory of what they were, the memory of what they can be, the fact that biologically they're still a human being, and that is what is respected, the fact that they are still a human being. Yes, they can't reason. So what happens when somebody stops being able to reason because of some mental disease? Or they become dependent on other people. And then the question is, are there family members who are willing to take care of them because of the memory and the love that they had for this person? And I think the answer is usually yes, right? You know, some of us might be willing to contribute to help somebody like that, you know, live their last years in life. But the reality is, that's when you lose your capacity to think, you lose your capacity to live as an individual. You're now completely dependent on others. So the objectivist position is, you can't just kill them because they're human beings still, and who are you to define when is the border? But then the question is, do you have an obligation to take care of them? And you have an obligation to the extent that you're married to them, to the extent that maybe they're your parents, if you love them, right? Not everybody loves their parents, so I get that. But if you love your parents, you take care of them. If you don't, you don't. So they are completely dependent on the goodwill of other people.
Okay, great. One question. Could we entertain one follow-up question? Because
it's not up to me, because there are other people here. Maybe go to the back of the line, a follow-up on this.
Vamos a hacer, we're going to do 2 more questions now. Vamos a hacer 2 más preguntas que tenemos que acordar también el break. Igual después los pueden encontrar a Yaron y a todos los intelectuales y oradores, objetivistas y no objetivistas, para hacerles preguntas en el foyer o van a estar por acá todo el día. Así que ahora vamos a hacer 2 más, una acá y una ahí, y nos vamos al break.
What he said, I have no idea what he said. Go ahead.
Hello.
Sorry, we're going to do 2 more questions, one over here, one over there, and then they can ask you questions during the day.
Hi, great talk. I had an answer. I've got the feeling that some people quit. Some people decide freely not to be free. They choose to give the power to the king,
yes,
as you said. What do we do with them in a society?
Yes, I think that the reality is that most people, overwhelming majority of people today have given up on their own minds, have given up on their own choices, and are willing to subservient themselves to an authority, to somebody else to tell them what to do and how to live. What do you do about them? There's nothing much we can do, right? We can educate them. We could try to break through. We can try to explain to them that they're never going to be happy. They're never going to be successful. That it's not in their self-interest to give up on their own mind. But for many of them, it's too late. And this is why I think any strategy for real freedom has to be focused on young people. It has to be focused on people before they've given up. You know, when I read Ayn Rand when I was 16, and I spent the first few years after reading Ayn Rand trying to convince my parents and everybody else I knew that these ideas, but it wasn't going to work, right? It was a waste of my time and their time and a lot of energy and a lot of... The reality is that if we want to convince people, you got to convince them when they're young, when they're open to new ideas, when there's still that excitement about, I'm looking forward to a life based on my values, and we want to give them the tools on how to live that life. So, this is why the reality is, and with all the optimism in Argentina, and I'm excited for you guys, this is a long-term battle. This doesn't get fixed by politics, and it doesn't get fixed quickly, and it doesn't get fixed immediately. True freedom. You can move more in that direction, and that's great, right? And we want to move more in that direction. But long-term, to actually achieve the kind of freedom we really want, that is a long-term educational battle, and it has to start with young people.
Thank you. Última. Sí.
Español.
Español. All right.
Hacer eso.
Escuchá. Comparto absolutamente y te felicito por la defensa de la libertad que has hecho. Creo que la libertad es fundamental para poder tener una vida plena y feliz. Lo que no entiendo es cómo se concilia la idea de libertad con la idea de gobierno. Yo creo que todo gobierno implica forzosamente el uso de la fuerza. El gobierno tiene el monopolio de la fuerza y además tiene el permiso de iniciar el uso de la violencia. O sea que obviamente soy anarquista, no creo en el gobierno y en el Estado, creo que no pueden existir y no veo cómo, yo sé que acaba de haber veo ahí libertarianismo, objetivismo, va a haber una serie de discrepancias. Bueno, no encuentro cómo hilvanar esos dos conceptos. Gobierno para mí es uso de la fuerza. Uso de la fuerza me quita libertad. Así acabó mi pregunta. Gracias. Gracias, thank you very much.
So as I said, there'll be a debate about this tomorrow, so we will talk about this more tomorrow. But I see it the other way around. Anarchy is force. Anarchy is full of force. You don't like what I do? Why not use force against me? My police force is stronger than your police force. Anarchy is the legitimization of force. It basically said force, like every other human action, like every other human interaction, is tradable. We can negotiate. We can trade. We can form police force entities. Force is a unique human phenomenon. It cannot be allowed to enter the marketplace. When force enters the marketplace, there's no marketplace. Force has to be monopolized and eradicated. So you don't like the word government, I don't care, use a different word. But you need an entity that restricts and eliminates force from society. Now, in order to do that, it can use force only under one condition. What is that condition? In self-defense, in retaliation. It can never initiate force. Anarchy is again saying, yeah, force is okay. Who has more of it? I want to sign up with the people who have more of it, who are willing to use more of it. No, you need force to be eradicated from society, and there's only one way to do that, and that is to create an institution that is its job, its only job. The only job of a government is to eradicate force from society. Now, the fact that there are governments that, all governments that we have today certainly, that violate that betray us, that don't do their job in eradicating force, indeed use force themselves, that is a betrayal. That is their bad governments. We need a good government. I'll also say this, that for most of human history, we've lived under anarchy. Most of human history has been anarchic. No real governments. And what do we have? Warring tribes. People fighting constantly. Bloodshed all through. And things calmed down a little bit when we had governments. Now, the governments, particularly an American government, like in its origins, are pretty good. They're not perfect. They've got some flaws and holes, but pretty good. We've had 250 years of pretty good lives. So instead of trashing the institution, let's go back and fix the institution that started out, at least the American government, pretty well, and now needs tinkering to get it back, and maybe even better than it was originally, so we can get to a point where the government does one thing and one thing only, protect our rights, which means eradicate force as a social institution. And that's what we should fight for. Anarchy is a distraction, but it's also, again, I believe it's an elevation of force to be a much more significant, much more important aspect of human life than it actually really is or should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaron. Fuerte aplauso para Yaron.